Hi everyone, Professor Phil Travis here. This announcement is for History 112, World History Part 2 here at Eastern Oregon University. I'm going to make this announcement kind of short. It is Thanksgiving this week, so it's a holiday week, and as a result of that, you will notice that the requirements on the discussion forum will be a little bit abbreviated. So this week I'm just going to ask you to make one post and one reply. You may do them at any point during the week. As long as any point during the week. I'm not going to, I'd like to see, the activity before Sunday. Let's say that. So activity before Sunday, but you can be active any day during the week. The reason I say that is just because, the goal of the discussion forum is hopefully to have a discussion with some of your classmates or with your professor. And if it happens on Sunday late at night, then that probably won't happen. But it is a holiday week, so if you want to, make your post and your reply on Tuesday, that's fine. I'm not going to hold to the multiple day requirement because it's a holiday week. So technically it's a short week. So one reply, one post, one day of activity this week in the discussion board because it is Thanksgiving this week. There's no assignment outside of the discussion forum this week, though you will notice in the discussion in the modules area, you will notice that I do have information that's posted for the optional second paper. So if you're doing that now, that's not due this week. It's due actually at the end of the term. I think the date is, it's due the Tuesday of exam week, if I remember correctly off the top of my head, the optional paper. So you only have to write one paper in this class. If you didn't write the first paper, then you have to write this second optional paper, which again is due at the beginning of the exam week. If you weren't happy with the score you received on your first paper, then you may write the optional second paper, and I drop the lowest grade. So it can't hurt your grade at all. It can only help you if you decide to do the optional second paper. So there'll be information relating to that in this week's modules. I will also put the study guide for the final, the last test, the third test. It's not cumulative, it's just another test. I will put that in there for you in the modules for this week as well. So you have those there to be able to reference. But the only graded assignment this week will be the discussion forum. One post, one reply, one day of activity, as long as it's not on Sunday. Let's see. So this week, we're reading from our textbook, of course, and we're going to be reading chapter 29 and 30. We're going to be looking at the Cold War, decolonization, which is the process whereby the former colonized countries of the world became independent. We're going to look at some examples with respect to that. And we're also talking about the topic of globalization this week, which we'll probably also we might continue that next week as well. So 29 and 30, the Cold War is our topic for this week. To the factoid. So the factoid for this week is actually related to one of the most significant decolonization conflicts of the Cold War, the Vietnam War, which of course involved not only nationalist resistance for independence in Vietnam, led particularly by the communist forces led by Ho Chi Minh. But it was also a conflict in which the world powers, the United States, the Soviet Union, and China, sort of all contributed to. And of course, ultimately, the United States fought directly in the Vietnam War. Upwards of 500,000 American troops by 1969 were stationed in Vietnam. The United States dropped more tonnage of bombs in Vietnam during the Vietnam War than it did in all theaters of World War II combined. And of course, it cost the lives of some 60,000 Americans. Death toll of Vietnamese from the French Indochina War and the Vietnam War, which runs from 1946 in the case of the French Indochina War until 1954 in the American Vietnam War. If you consider the beginning of advisors really runs from the late 50s to 1975, though direct involvement of the United States runs from 1965 to 1973, the very beginning of 1973. But the death toll from that 30-year period of conflict for the Vietnamese people is estimates are upwards of 1 million people. And actually, the United States government to this day still contributes foreign aid to countries like Vietnam and Laos and Cambodia to help clean up all of the unexploded ordinances, landmines, unexploded bombs that continue to be problematic in certain areas of Cambodia and Laos and Vietnam, as the legacy of that war in that sense continues to remain. So here's the interesting thing, the interesting factoid. The United States, of course, fought directly in the Vietnam War. The Soviet Union and the Chinese also contributed to the North Vietnamese communist efforts led by folks like Ho Chi Minh, Pham Van Dong, and Vo Nguyen Giap, the great Vietnamese general. So it was very much a Cold War conflict, as during the Cold War, the major powers very much descended on the developing world to try to expand or maintain their sphere of influence in the world. And the United States, of course, was trying to contain the spread of communism from Southeast Asia and thereby maintain its sphere of influence. Well, here's the factoid. The factoid is that despite the fact that the United States containment policy ultimately became based on this idea that it had to contain the spread of communism by fighting sort of defensive wars anywhere in the world where communism was seen as advancing, despite that fact, at the end of the Second World War, when Ho Chi Minh declared independence from Vietnam, it would have been a surprise to Ho Chi Minh and maybe to many others that the United States would in fact in the future be fighting to contain communism against the forces of Ho Chi Minh in Vietnam. And the reason why, and this is the factoid, during the Second World War, Ho Chi Minh and the United States were actually allies. Small level allies, but allies that worked together in fighting the Japanese, who of course controlled that area of the world after defeating France in Vietnam at the beginning of the Second World War. The United States actually trained 250 of the first Viet Minh fighters. Ultimately, during the American Vietnam War, the Viet Minh would be known as the Viet Cong. They're the guerrilla fighters that fought for Ho Chi Minh and his general Vo Nguyen Giap. The United States helped train the first 250 of those fighters. The OSS Deer mission actually treated Ho Chi Minh, maybe even saved his life, treating him for dysentery. They shared intelligence. They helped with downed American flyers. They shared radio equipment. And so the United States and Ho Chi Minh, and we knew he was a communist, but the United States knew he was a communist, but they understood he was a nationalist first and a communist second. Meaning that he was not simply, sort of wedded to the idea of spreading communism. He was primarily a nationalist. So they were allies at the end of the Second World War. And here's the factoid. This is the factoid. When Ho Chi Minh declared the independence of Vietnam, a communist Vietnam, he had written multiple letters to President Harry Truman seeking an alliance with the United States. He had the band play the Star-Spangled Banner, and he even directly used language from the American Declaration of Independence when he declared the independence of Vietnam at the end of World War II in 1945. And in that sense, it's sort of an interesting twist that 2 decades later, the United States would fight probably its most tragic of all conflicts, the Vietnam War, to contain the forces of Ho Chi Minh's communism in Southeast Asia. So Ho Chi Minh sought an alliance with the United States, had the band play the Star-Spangled Banner, and even directly quoted the Declaration of Independence, as well as he wrote multiple letters to then President Harry Truman. The alliance was not to be had. The United States first supported the French because we believed in a strong Europe to contain communism in the 40s. And by the 1950s, the United States foreign policy thinking became incredibly focused on the idea that any form of communism anywhere was somehow associated with the works of the Soviet Union and China, and thereby had to be contained no matter what, that the United States could not have um, any other kind of relationship with a country like um, Vietnam, led by a communist movement. So that's the factoid for this week. Ho Chi Minh and his seeming attempt to create a positive alliance relationship with the United States when he declared the independence of Vietnam in August of 1945 at the end of the Second World War. Send me that factoid no later by Wednesday by midnight. Get your bonus point towards a test. Let's have a great week. Enjoy the holiday. Let me know if you have any questions, and I will see you in the discussion forum.